When you hear value investing, you might think of complicated spreadsheets and trying to time the market, right? Well, according to the book, The New Value Investing, the real secret to beating the market is actually a lot simpler, and it's much closer to home. It's all about mastering your own emotions. So let's break down exactly how that works.
Okay, so we spend all this time worrying about things like market crashes, inflation, you name it. But this book asks a really powerful question. What if the single biggest threat to your portfolio isn't out there at all? What if it's right here, inside your own head?
Let's be honest. Research shows most of us invest with our gut. It's all "I feel this" or "my gut says that." We buy stocks we know, we freak out over scary headlines, and we get caught up in all that short-term noise. But the alternative? It's an objective process, one that's based on careful analysis in a clear set of criteria. And believe me, the difference in the results between these two ways of thinking, it's just staggering. So why are our brains so bad at this? Well, behavioral science has a pretty clear answer, and it boils down to this number: 2. Our brains are hardwired to feel the sting of a loss about twice as much as the joy of an equal gain. Think about that. It's an old survival instinct that is just a complete disaster for modern investing. It's why we sell our winners way too early just to lock in that good feeling, and why we cling to our losers forever just to avoid the pain of admitting we made a mistake.
Okay, so here's the big takeaway. The market isn't some perfectly rational, logical machine. Nope, it's just a giant collection of people, all of us, driven by these same emotional biases. And this creates what the author calls emotional crowds. Think of them like stampeding herds that just rampage through the market, pushing prices way, way out of line with a company's actual true value. And that, right there, that is where we find our opportunity. These price distortions, the ones driven by all that emotion, they have a name: market anomalies. It's just a fancy way of saying there are moments when a stock's price gets totally disconnected from what the business is actually worth. And a really smart value investor, they don't try to outsmart everybody. They just build a system to spot these moments and take advantage of the very predictable mistakes that these emotional crowds always make.
All right, let's look at a super powerful example of this in action. It's called the low price ratio effect. And for decades, the data is just crystal clear. Stocks with low price to earnings, or PE ratios, have consistently beaten stocks with high ones. Now, all a PE ratio does is compare a company's stock price to its profits. The emotional crowd, oh, they love to pay a huge price for those exciting, popular, high-growth stories. But the value investor, they just systematically buy good, solid companies when they're on sale.
But there's always a catch, isn't there? You have to ask, why are these stocks so cheap in the first place? Well, it's because they often belong to companies facing some real headwinds, maybe slowing growth, a tough market, maybe even some management issues. These are definitely not the pretty stocks you hear everyone buzzing about. And that is exactly why the emotional crowd runs away from them, which in turn creates the perfect opportunity for an investor with discipline.
Here's another really big idea: the neglected firm effect. Think about it. All the big investors, all the Wall Street analysts, they're all focused on the huge, popular companies. And you can see it in the data right here. Firms with tons of analysts covering them have an average size of over $17 billion. But the companies with little or no coverage, they're tiny in comparison, and way fewer big institutions own them. So let me ask you, where do you think you're more likely to find a real hidden gem? Okay, so this is all great in theory, but how do we actually put it into practice? It all starts with building a smarter portfolio. And proper diversification isn't about owning hundreds of different stocks. It really just comes down to two simple rules. Rule 1, own somewhere between 10 and 20 stocks. And Rule 2, make sure they come from at least 6 different unrelated sectors. That's it. This lets you capture the general growth of the economy without letting any single company's problems wreck your entire portfolio. Now, I know a lot of us are in this boat. We've got way too much money tied up in just one or two things. Maybe it's stock from your job or just one investment that really took off. The book gives a super clear, unemotional way to fix this. You don't sell it all at once. That's a recipe for regret. Instead, you create a simple plan to sell off a little bit at a time, maybe every month or every quarter. And the most important part, the part you can't skip, is you have to stick to that plan no matter what the market is doing. Then, you just take that cash and use it to build out that properly diversified portfolio we just talked about.
So where on earth do you find these stocks? Well, the emotional investor gets their ideas from the 3 Bs: their broker, their barber, or their brother-in-law. And that just shrinks their world down to a handful of popular ideas. The value investor, on the other hand, does the complete opposite. You start with the entire universe,
thousands of stocks, and then you apply objective filters, like a low PE ratio or no analyst coverage, to systematically hunt for those hidden opportunities. And what does that process actually turn up? Well, running a screen for low PE, highly neglected stocks might spit out a list of companies that looks something like this. Yeah, I know, you've probably never heard of a single one of them. They are not making headlines. But all the research suggests that building a diversified portfolio of businesses exactly like these is how you get the statistical edge needed to beat the market over the long haul.
All right, this next one is a real pro-level technique, and it is absolutely critical. Do not fall in love with your stocks. In fact, the author of the book, who manages millions of dollars, says he makes a point of not even remembering the names of the stocks he owns. Now, why would he do that? Because it forces the selling decision to be 100% objective. If a stock doesn't meet his criteria anymore, it's just gone. No drama, no regret, no second guessing.
So as we start to pull this all together, it's so important to remember that old saying, this is a marathon, not a sprint. And that's especially true here. A value strategy is not going to work every single month or even every year. There will be these dry spells, sometimes for a year or even longer, where all the popular flashy growth stocks are just soaring and your portfolio of boring, undervalued companies is going nowhere. And sticking with your plan through those tough times, well, that's the hardest part of all of this.
You know, if you only remember one single thing from this whole breakdown, please make it this quote. The author boils his entire strategy down to just 3 things: patience, patience, and more patience. The system itself is actually pretty simple, and the historical data is there to back it up. The real secret, the thing that separates the winners from the losers, is just having the discipline to see it all the way through.
And so that really leaves us with one final question to ask yourself. And I mean, take a really honest look at how you do things. Are your investing decisions driven by a consistent, objective set of rules? Or are they driven by whatever's in the headlines, by gut feelings, and by the emotional roller coaster of the market? Because figuring out the answer to that question, well, that could be the real key to unlocking your own long-term success.